Welcome everyone, Questini here with the discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires to talk about the Dwarfs, also Realms of Chaos, if anyone still cares about Realms of Chaos. I think going forward, Creative Assembly should just completely ignore Realms of Chaos for DLC content, no one cares for it, and just have story content in Immortal Empires with the toggle when you begin the campaign, so you can either start in a pure sandbox mode or you can start in a story mode if you so desire, with the difference of course being that you have all those story objectives. We know Creative Assembly is going to release improvements for the Dwarves, maybe even a complete rework. We don't really know what they're going to do. They just have announced that they're going to work on these races. What they're going to do with these races exactly, we have no idea. But I do want to talk about what I think they should do, what the issues with the Dwarves currently are, and what kind of content they can add. But first off, let's talk about Legendary Lord choices. They could either add Joseph Buckman, which would work as a Legendary Lord, or they could just add him as a Legendary Hero. Given the Nemesis crown, I think Buckman would make sense as a Legendary Hero. As a Legendary Lord, it would be pretty awkward to have a Legendary Lord focused on Rangers, that a Lord is focused on Rangers when we already have Rangers in the game as part of another DLC. So that would be pretty awkward unless Creative Assembly changed their DLC policy to give you Rangers as part of that DLC. And if they were to do that, they might not do other things for the Dwarves. I think a much better option would be to focus on Malachi, since it does seem that they're going to add Tamarkin. Based on what people are speculating, they're going to add Tamarkin, they're going to add the Dark Lady of Nuln, and if that's the case, they can add Malachi, which could add a new dimension to the Dwarven race, specifically focusing on Thunder Barges, and then there's the Spirit of Grungni. Now, the Spirit of Grungni, you might have seen it in some mods, but here's the thing, the Spirit of Grungni in the lore is a lot larger than what you might see in a mod. It's the size of, I don't know, a shield helicarrier or a super carrier in real life. That's how big it is, based on the things I've read. So it's pretty large. I think it would be interesting to have a dwarf legendary lord that has a horde army, for all the issues that horde armies do currently have, but it could work. Or you can have a legendary lord that has the Axiatal campaign mechanics, where you're teleporting around the world doing helping out the dwarven race, which pretty much what Axiatal does by taking down the forces of disorder. In fact, I think that this is exactly what Grumbrindle should be doing. Like, Grumbrindle, yeah, okay, have a campaign start over there aimed at Malekith, but also teleporting around, that would make a lot of sense for a Grumbrindle, because that's pretty much what he does in the lore. But those are just some ideas for Legendary Lords for the Dwarfs in Warhammer 3. What about the race? Well, there's a lot of things they could add, but first let's talk about the main issues the Dwarfs currently have. First off, if we look at, say, Lords, regular Dwarven Lords, and we take a look at them, they don't have a special skill line, they have nothing that makes them all that great. Yes, they have the melee skill line, the blue skill line, the red skill line, and all of that, but they're really lacking some variety over here, which I think they could use. There are mods that already fix that already improve this situation, but if there was anything I would change about the Dwarves right now, it would be to add those kind of skill lines to them. The heroes are fine, because the heroes do have those choices, though more choices wouldn't be bad for them. Some further refinement of their current hero roster, as well as a new hero. This is why I like to see Joseph Buckman as a legendary hero, because you could also have brewmasters for dwarves, giving them the much needed casualty replenishment hero option that they need. Though hopefully one that you can acquire before tier 3. Because right now with the dwarves, to increase your hero capacity for Thanes and engineers, you need tier 4, which is not great. Runesmiths can be increased in capacity at tier 3, sure. So we could have that for brewmasters. I think that would be an excellent situation. But the issues of the dwarves are not with their heroes or their lords. In fact, that's the least amount of problems that they currently have in the game at the moment. Also, it's kind of weird that Forgrim's engineer over here, his strength is actually random over here. Like you can have a construction cost benefit, you can have determined. It's a bit weird that he starts with an engineer, a dwarf and a master engineer that just has a random trait in his campaign. Bit odd, I would dare say. But what are the issues with the dwarves? Well, they are many. First off, the dwarves have no way of improving casualty replenishment for themselves, with the exception of the barley field, which is not a casualty replenishment building, it's a growth building. And even then, the amount of casualty replenishment you're getting from the barley field is pretty pathetic. The second way you can do so is through research, specifically the Recite Ancient Grudges, but that's 3%. Now, Grombrindle is the exception. He can get 20% for his own army in his campaign, and that actually makes his campaign a lot better than the other dwarves, but it's a major issue. Why is casualty replenishment such a major problem, you might ask? Well, it's because of the impact it has on your campaign. Since you have poor casualty replenishment, it pushes the dwarves down a playstyle where they rely heavily on their lords and heroes to take the damage, because lords and heroes innately replenish much faster than units, and dwarves especially, they have the skill of Iron Willed to improve their casualty replenishment. So they can take a lot of damage, and because you can use the fort system to give yourself Armors of Destiny as well as other items that really help you at soaking damage. So the dwarf playstyle is to have their lords and heroes soak a lot of damage while they're reliant on a ranged army of quarrelers and grudge throwers to do all the work for them. No other playstyle comes as close to the quarreler grudge thrower playstyle in the dwarves, and you'll be using that in campaign after campaign after campaign. It gets really boring very, very quickly. It's not a fun playstyle. The range playstyle is certainly not fun anymore in Warhammer 3. It is effective. It works. It will win you a lot of battles, but the problem is it's boring as dirt, because all you're doing in a field battle is you're just parking your army in some kind of formation, checkerboard formation, oblique formation. It doesn't matter. You're parking your army and you're killing everything in sight, and if someone gets through, well, you can duel them. There are exceptions. Vlad von Karstein can kill your entire army if you don't have a good enough duelist to kill him, but for the most part, against most enemies, especially with your Legendary Lord, that's how you win. In sieges especially, and sieges are the main challenging battles in a campaign, not the field battles, but in sieges especially, it's a miserable playstyle, because all you're going to do is you're going to park all your range units outside of the walls, kill everything on the walls, destroy the wall towers, and then move in to kill everything inside. Move in very slowly. It is dull as dirt. You have no reason whatsoever to make use of anything else in the Dwarven roster. I mean, Iron Breakers to some extent, sure, but Gyrocopters, Gyron Bombers, Slayers, Longbeards, there is virtually no reason to ever use them in a campaign once you get Quarrelers. You might start getting Dwarf Warriors and Miners with blasting charges early on in your campaign, sure, until you can get the Quarreler Doomstack. So, and this is all because of casualty replenishment. Like, poor casualty replenishment pushes you down a really boring playstyle. That's going to be the same in every campaign you play. And it gets dull, it gets boring. And if they don't fix the casualty replenishment situation, that is not going to change. It doesn't matter what kind of units they add. Like, if they add the tier 4, tier 5 unit in the campaign and don't fix that, don't bring a major rework, they're not going to fix it. I also think that the dwarves not having something like the scrap upgrade just doesn't make sense. Like, you should have unit upgrades as the dwarves, because that's actually what they're all about. Sure, runes can fill that role, but runes are actually limited. And there are already mods that do it. There's a Valea Priestess mod that does that. There's a mod that gives you a craftable dwarf replenishment. There's mods that remove the rune limit, and so on and so forth. So there are mods that already are fixing the issue of casualty replenishment. Another issue for the dwarves, another major problem, is that they have very limited recruitment capacity. They start with 2 by default. Now, other races may start with 2, but they have ways of improving it. You do as well technically as the dwarves with the armory. But I'll tell you something. The dwarves have an okay economy and it does scale up, but your units are actually pretty expensive. So in a campaign as dwarves, if I'm taking over a minus settlement, I'm certainly not building a damn armory in it unless it's a very special circumstance. And I'm certainly not building an armory just to increase local recruitment capacity, because what I want to do is get the toolmaker workshop, the drinking hole for the trade resources, and not the control, the trade resources, because these will sell for a good amount of gold. This is the thing about the dwarves. If you play their campaign for like 100 turns, they have scalability, but you're enduring 100 turns of pure fucking misery. And that's something I think people shouldn't ignore. A race isn't good just because they can do well in 100 turns. I mean, you could play the Vampire Coast in 100 turns and do well, but that doesn't mean their campaign is great. And Warhammer 3 is right now focused on early game situation. Look at the greenskins. They are good in the late game, but they're especially amazing in the early game. And it's not just the greenskins, the high elves, the dark elves. I mean, you want to see a race that does well in both the early game, but scales up very well as well in the late game. The high elves are the perfect example of that. Their baseline armies are amazing. They get access to casualty replenishment pretty quickly. And their early game economy is pretty solid. The dwarf early game situation is exactly the opposite. And this is something that needs to be brought to attention, because I see a lot of mods and reworks out there that, oh, we're improving the late game. Well, I don't care how much you improve the late game. I care about how my campaign is going to be from the early game. And having limited recruitment slots puts significant limits on your campaign. Now, the dwarves aren't the only race that has such limited recruitment slots, but those other races either are like the wood elves, and the wood elves don't give a damn because, one, their armies are incredible on the battlefield, and two, they don't actually have to hold a lot of territory. This is the problem for the dwarves. They actually do need to hold a lot of territory. You could consider the Dark Elves. Sure, the Dark Elves are another race that has limited recruitment slots, except the Dark Elves also have Black Arcs, and that more than makes up for it. A mobile army that recruits quite quickly. Now, you can improve local recruitment capacity, but look at how you do it. You either get the armory, or you get research that increases it by 2 total. So you can get to 4 with research, you can get to 5 with an army. That's not too bad, but it is very slow and also expensive, because dwarf buildings are very expensive. That's the next point. Everything that the dwarves do is very, very expensive. It's not quite as bad as Kislev. Kislev has a worse economy, but at the same time, while Kislev may have a worse overall economy, Kislevite armies are actually going to be, well, the Khazar armies at least are going to be cheaper somewhat. And Kislev has amazing casualty replenishment. And mind you, Kislev is still a pretty bad race in the game that needs a rework. Though the difference is, the dwarves, when it comes to their economy, they have it worse than many other races, not just because their buildings are expensive, but because they earn very, very little. A pathetic amount from sacking settlements. You want to look at the race that earned that, like, you want to have a contrast. Consider Bretonnia. Yes, Bretonnia, a race that a lot of people have issues with. Bretonnia earns a mountain of money through their baseline economy. Their economic buildings are cheap. They have one of the highest growths in the game. They have more unit recruitment slots, and they have a quote-unquote negative trade that buffs their sacking, the amount of money they get from sacking settlements, to insane amounts. Like, Bretonnia genuinely compares to Greenskins in growth, economy, and money that you're gaining from sacking and looting settlements. And they're a free faction that was added in Warhammer 1 later down the line. So all these issues go hand in hand. The third issue is related to growth, and you can also attach control here. See, on legendary difficulty by default, we get -8 control in every campaign, basically. Now, for the vast majority of races, like 90% of races, 95% really of campaigns, you don't give a shit about it. I mean, it can be annoying, it can require some effort, but it's not really a difficulty factor. It's just some bullshit that Creative Assembly introduced in Rome 2. Yeah, a lot of the issues we still have in Total War to this day were introduced in previous games. Even going back as far as Precious Shogun 2 for the Day 1 DLC race pack, because that was a Shogun 2 thing, not a Rome 2 edition. But either way, The problem with control for the dwarves is not that they're going to face rebellions. In fact, quite the opposite. You're never going to face a rebellion as dwarves, which actually is a bit of a problem because rebellions, like if you're facing rebellions, you could deal with that. You could gain a lot of money and experience from dealing with rebellions, but you don't have that luxury as the dwarves. See, because if you keep your grudge level to a good level, you're getting free control, and then while you have the difficulty modifier, if you get weak control, you're going to get +8, so that's going to nullify it. You get free 2 or free control from grudges, so that's going to go a long way towards dealing with your tax control issue. And then one of the research you want to do very quickly is to actually get High King Authority. That's 1 control, 2 control, quite a bit more control, right, in your campaign. And all added together means that you don't have great control, but you're not going to face rebellions, but what you are going to face is poor level of control just because of this difficulty modifier, which isn't going to affect your rebellion. It's not the recruitment cost that's the problem here. That's not an issue, really, in most campaigns. The issue is the growth, because dwarves have piss poor growth. There are ways to increase it, but the main way most races deal with growth is they don't deal with it for secondary building like the barley, if you'll know. What they do is for the main settlement building, and the main settlement building generates piss poor growth for dwarves. In Karazak, even Karazak, sure, it can get to a pretty decent level of growth, though other factions beat the crap out of them, but Karazak is a special settlement. Like if every settlement you had the level of growth as Karazak, that would be one thing, but they do not. And besides, Karazak to get to tier 5 is a fortune. So buildings are really expensive to get, and you're going to struggle to actually get them. The problem with limited buildings, the problem with limited tiers is not that, oh, you're not having access to your roster. No, you only need to get to tier 2 to get to Quarrelers and Grudge Throwers, and that's your army that you can make use throughout the entire campaign. The issue is the limitations on your economy and the limitation on unit choice. So already you have plenty of reasons not to use many of the units in the dwarf roster, and then you have further reasons not to touch the dwarf roster because of the poor growth that dwarves have, they're going to struggle to get those building slots to get going. So lots of issues in a dwarf campaign. Again, mods can fix it. I don't think there is any growth mod for dwarves, but there is a mod that removes the public order penalty. And that alone, because you will end up in a positive level of control, you'll start getting growth. It doesn't make up for all the deficiencies of the dwarves, but combined with research, you can make it work, but it's still pretty awful to deal with. So those are the issues of the dwarves, some of the main issues of the dwarves. The last one, I wouldn't say it's a main issue, but it just is reflective of how bad the dwarves are, is research. Yes, you can get students and archivists to buff up the research rate, but look at the research tree. It's just such a mess. Like, excluding the research benefit you can get with students and archivists, and isn't that the fine mechanic in the game, where every single turn you start playing the dwarves or empire or other races, though most of the time you don't necessarily care about it. You do care about it by the dwarves because this tree is bloated as all hell. Every time you start a turn, you just go to the research tree, you click on whatever you're researching to pause it, so you have a chance to gain students and archivists. So you can get a ridiculous amount of research rate, but look at the stuff you're getting. Let me tell you what you're going to get from this, what you should get. If you're playing any Dwarven campaign, the first thing you want to get is autonomy of the holds, because you want that growth, because your growth is terrible, so you want to buff it. That's 12 turns. And then, since you're there already, you might as well get High King Authority to get the diplomatic relations benefit with other dwarves, and also the control benefit, which will also help the growth indirectly. It's not great, but it's better than nothing, right? So that's 22 turns, 12 at least, 22 at most. Then, after that, you may want to get Heavy Cornerstone to get 10 growth by default. Another 12 turns. So you're looking at 34 turns just to get what you're getting through this, just to understand how bullshit this is. What you're getting through this is what? Free control, 15 and 25 growth, effectively. And a bit of income, but it's not really a lot. And 34 turns. I don't need to compare this to the research trees of virtually every other race to compare what they can get in 34 turns. Sure, you can do it much faster with archivists and students. I made that point. But just by default, how awful it is. And keep in mind, this isn't even the slowest rate because I start with an engineer, so that gives me 20% research benefit. Then, once you're done with that, you are going to want to buff those wonderful quarrelers that you're using. So you're going to want to get Master War Crossbows, you're going to want to get Renowned Deadeyes, you're going to want to get Ammunition Wagons. All of this, when you're adding all of this together, you're probably looking at 20 extra turns. So over 50 turns for all of this. Other races may get it in half the time or even a third of the time. And once you're done with that, so 50 turns, that's pretty much an entire campaign. Yes, you can beat the campaign in that kind of time and get an endgame crisis in that time. After you deal with that, well, the obvious thing you want to get in your campaign is to get Grimnir's favor. The reason behind this is pretty obvious, right? Because you want the local recruitment capacity, you want the casualty replenishment, and the problem is the benefits along the way are not really worth it because the units you're buffing are not really units you're going to carry. I mean, leadership, okay, all well and good, armor for dwarf shielded units, but the benefits just don't add a whole lot, and that's 62 turns. So imagine spending your entire campaign just to get a lot of crappy research, as well as a couple of good things that you want. Because 5%, because I don't really care for 5% recruitment costs for Quarreler units, Ranger units, and Thunderers. I do obviously care for the missile strength or base missile damage. Sure, I do care for recruitment rank, I care for ammunition. But a lot of the things that you're getting over here, you could just condense a lot of this stuff together. I mean, it's amazing, especially when you look at the Chaos Dwarf research tree and how they did that compared to how they did with the Dwarves. Speaking about the Chaos Dwarfs, all of these things that I mentioned, the research, the recruitment, the cost of buildings, the growth, the public order, the casualty replenishment, the hero situation, all of these are issues that can be pretty easily solved. Just tweak some values, make it better, right? It's just a campaign, and the Dwarves certainly are a weak race right now. Maybe tune down the Dwarves when played by the AI Legendary, because you know why AI Dwarves are so insane? Because guess what the AI Dwarves get on Legendary difficulty? They get better growth, casualty replenishment, income, recruitment slots, control. Yeah, all of the issues that you have in a campaign when playing the Dwarves, a high difficulty, Legendary difficulty, solves for the Dwarves on that kind of difficulty. So it's just a question of tweaking some values there. But that's not a rework. That's fixes. That's improvements. Rework, I would say they need the economy of the Chaos Dwarfs, because I'll tell you bluntly, the economy of the Chaos Dwarfs just fits so well with the regular dwarfs. The regular dwarf shouldn't be about holding a vast array of territory as proper settlements, but it's about outposts, for instance. That's actually what we see in the lore. They hold outposts, trading outposts, or trading outposts where they're helping to protect caravans traversing their land, that kind of stuff. So I think if we look at the dwarves from a lore perspective, it just makes a lot of sense for them to have the Chaos Dwarf economic system in their campaign. Without the laborers, of course, but you have grudges, you have oath gold. They should, you could use oath gold as part of that to make it work as a special resource. I think what Creative Assembly did with the Chaos Dwarf economy ended up working very, very well, and I think they should replicate that system as well. I mean, especially for the better dwarf units. I mean, hell, you're gonna add thunder barges or monstrous units for dwarves. Great, tie it to give us an armament system and give us the fort system the hell fort system that the Chaos Dwarfs have. The Chaos Dwarfs have so much, and even the political system, the caravan system. Copy and paste the Chaos Dwarfs into the regular dwarves, make adjustments to make them more lore friendly, and that could work. Other people are talking about a Forbidden Workshop type campaign for Malachi. I personally like to see, honestly, I would like to see actually Gotrek as a legendary lord, a proper playable campaign with Oxyotl type mechanics, or Grumbrindle having Oxyotl type mechanics in his campaign. But there's so much you can do with the dwarves. Not just mere improvements, but actually making them a fun and enjoyable race. Because This is the thing, even if you buff the dwarves, casualty replenishment, recruitment slots, etc., mods already do this, they're still not that fun to play. There are races that are much more fun to play because they offer you more choice, because they have more campaign mechanics, because they have better systems. And that's what the dwarves so desperately need at the moment. Questine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.